also want to greet you, dear ones. We spent time in Seattle in the early 1990s and got to know some of you there and count those years as a great blessing. And we overlapped briefly with Padma and Hriman in 93 and 94, and then shifted back here to Ananda Village, or back here to California, I should say. But this topic is a fascinating one and a very challenging one in a certain way of looking at it. We had the privilege of working on a number of Swamiji's movies in preparation in India before they were even sort of conceptualized as Swamiji was working on them. But then later, when we shifted back to America in 2012, we helped with the production of Finding Happiness, and then later in 2013, what was the movie in 2013? No, after the next one, The Answer. And it was amazing to sort of work on the production crew of those things, because I had no idea, I think many of us have no idea how much work goes into making a movie. And that ability to sort of listen, to be aware, it struck me, as Nirmala mentioned, attunement is a key word in this reading, but it's a key word in our lives. It's something that Swamiji made mention of many, many times. And that ability to stay in the moment. So in a film production, the one of the sort of catchphrases is hurry up and wait. And there's this, you work 12-hour days, 6 days a week. That's what a film production is. And a lot of that time is waiting for the next thing to happen. And so there's all this preparation going on. Certain groups of people are working like mad. Other people are getting ready to, and then boom, the cameras are rolling and it's all here and now. And if something goes wrong, it has to be fixed immediately. And the people who can fix it are poised and ready. And they have to almost be waiting, intuiting, sensing, okay, am I going to be needed? And then boom, if they are, they've got to zoom into position and try to fix whatever it is that needs to be dealt with. And attunement is our ability to listen to God's grace. As Nirmala was talking about, this movement of grace, it's not just a passive thing. We can think of receptivity as, sitting back on the lazy boy and shifting the gear shift, putting our legs up, and saying, okay, Lord, lay it on me. And no, that's not how it works. I'll just remind those of you who know already that Padma especially, and Hriman to some extent, were involved in Swamiji's publications many, many years ago, and actually throughout many, many years, many decades, in fact. And Nirmala and I also worked in the publications behind the scenes in the 80s and a little more directly in the 1990s and early 2000s, and then later a little bit in India even. And during those years, I observed a number of things that were striking about Swamiji, but one in particular that just never ceased to amaze me. So we would have just produced the latest book, which was going to be, by definition, the greatest, the most, the big seller, the one that's going to change the work, or whatever the next thing was. And we would go to promote that book. Well, we would have learned a lot from all the books that led up to that one. But Swamiji always had a new angle. There was always something he wanted to try that was different, that had never been done before. And, my first reaction to this was kind of annoyance. It's like, look, we've already learned how to do all of this stuff. Why don't we do that too on this one? Well, that was never good enough for Swamiji. He was always raising the bar. And that's, I believe, one of the reasons why the affirmation work gets paired with this reading on soul receptivity, because soul receptivity is work. It involves work. Now, we can think of love as a sort of feeling, a sentiment, a lovely sentiment. It's what Hollywood and Bollywood are woven around in many ways, but it's much more than that. And I think the reading holds keys to this, and Nirmala highlighted that. Love is a movement. Love is an energy. Love is a service. Love is active devotion. And for us to explore that, for us to experience that, means we have to get up to speed with it. I'll use forgive me for those who are not into this sort of thing. I'll use a sports analogy here. And sorry, Seahawks fans, I know it was a lousy year. Life goes on, even-mindedness. We do the best we can. There's a position in the football world called the quarterback, and I suppose most of you have heard of that. The quarterback is the one who generally handles the ball on every play. And the quarterback will often, you could argue that the quarterback gets paid the big bucks for throwing the ball to someone, and usually that someone is called a wide receiver. Receiver, meaning he receives the ball, and he's supposed to catch the ball. I remember my dad throwing the ball with me as a kid, and if the ball bounced off my hands, he would say, "Don't have cement hands, soft hands." But what a wide receiver has to do is run like the wind. They have to run as fast as they can go. They have to be extraordinarily agile. They have to be in a certain spot at a certain time, get their hands there and receive that ball. That's a little bit like what we have to do as devotees to receive God's grace. We have to move our energy to be in tune with that movement of grace. Swamiji, in the work in publications and in all the work that he did with Ananda, he was trying to get us to understand there's a bigger reality. There's a bigger world we can serve. There's a grace that's trying to move through, and it can't move through you if you don't let it and if you won't work with it. And so he was always looking for people to work with him. And I can tell you that Padma was one of the rare souls who could say yes to Swamiji and still figure out how to pay the bills at the end of the month or at the end of the year, because inevitably what Swamiji wanted to do was expansive and almost by definition expensive. I'll give you an example. This was a little bit after Padma's era, but the very first book that I typeset was called Do It Now. And it was a small little book in its first iteration. Over many incarnations, that book came to be called Living Wisely, Living Well. But I remember the business, Crystal Clarity Publishers, was in a very dire state in the mid-1990s when this book came out. And there's always this juggling act of trying to figure out how many books to print. Because if you print lots of books, the cost per book comes down, but then you have to sell those books. And it takes a keen intuition to know how to work that equation most effectively, so you're not sitting on a lot of books and tying up a lot of money, etc. Well, when it came time to print those books, we decided to print 5,000 of them. And Swamiji, for his part, said, well, then I'm going to print 5,000 of my own to give away. And he went on a series of lectures around the country. And I also know this from slightly personal experience, because my own mother in Chicago area went to one of those lectures, and she said, and he gave this wonderful talk, and then afterwards he gave us his book. She was just stunned. It was just impossible to imagine that an author would give their own book away. But I asked Swamiji once, years later, I said, because I was trying to understand this equation. How does this work? How does this grace, how do you know? How are you in tune with knowing where to draw the line? I said, well, what if you had thought to print 50,000? Would it still have worked? Would the grace have gone that far? And he essentially said, well, it was appropriate to the time. I mean, probably what he was implying is I didn't have the money to print 50,000, but also he wasn't going to dedicate years of his life to trying to give away 50,000 of these books. It was out of scale. To a certain point, there is expansiveness. Beyond a certain point, it becomes presumption. And we have to learn, and that's attunement. It's a musical quality. We have to learn to listen. When you hear the choir singing in harmony, it's because everyone is both singing and listening at the same time. And as Nirmala pointed out, we have to learn to get into the heart aspect of life, because that's where we can both express and listen at the same time. Love is a service, love is devotion, and love itself is attunement, because once we are in that flow, it's like we just simply come to know, okay, this is the right time. This is the right moment. Now is the moment that I can say what it is that needs to be said in the right way, not in the wrong way, which can take years of untangling. And we will feel the grace of God and the great ones coming through us. So, dear ones, we want to just thank you for having us in Seattle. It's been a while since we were there. I remember when the temple was being built, and as I said, we lived there in the 1990s, long before the temple, but was built in this form. But in the deepest sense, the temple is what's in our own hearts, and we are grateful for the time that we could share together there and in this virtual way as well. And just send you much love from Sacramento, and I hope that this grace will flow through you into your life and touching all those that you know. Namaste. God bless you.